Another thing to do, in addition to getting to know your audience, is to recognize them. To make sure that you reach out to say hello by name. When they reach out to you via social media, when they email you, check out their stuff. Who are they? Connect with them in some way. Comment about something. If they say, they send you an email and they tell you, you're awesome, then email them back. Yeah, you too. I love the way you did X, Y, and Z on your website. I really love you take the time, you step into them, and they'll step into you. And this over here, por vida, forever. My business coach, Erica Lyremark, she actually comes into kind of teaching about business and sales, that you think about your customers as customers for life, por vida, forever. So you think about your listeners forever. Think about it in that respect. They'll be with you. So it's like, those are the guys that are going to be there with you. You take care of them in that way. You don't think so much like, I want to get 100,000 people, but you connect with the ones that you have right in front of you. Keep it interesting. And by keep it interesting, I don't mean that you're going to have to all of a sudden do something crazy like that. Although sometimes with little kids, to make them pay attention to you, you do. But when you're doing your podcast, it's not necessarily that you try to have, all of a sudden do all kinds of tricks to keep them engaged, but you have to keep it interesting for yourself. When you start to listen to yourself on your own podcast, are you interested? Are you still passionate about what you're podcasting about? Are you still into it? That's the kind of thing that keeps things interested. I can't, right now, at least at the top of my head, gosh, I wish I would have thought about this later, but I started to listen to a couple of podcasts simply because they were so into what they were talking about, and whatever the subject matter was, I had no interest in, like nothing. But all of a sudden, I just was so engaged with what they were talking about. They were super interested, therefore it brought me to be so sucked into their world, which is something that's super important from here. Provide opportunities for engagement and participation from your audience, from your existing audience. And when I say this isn't something like, hey, tweet out, that you love my podcast. But it's not necessarily that. But it's things like, at least for me, and I know this is perhaps just a female thing, but putting up outfit A and putting up outfit B on my Facebook page will get a lot of engagement from my audience because I know who they are. That has nothing to do with yoga. That has something to do with me. It's engaging them and to step into who I am as a human being. So when you ask them, questions about whatever, what's your favorite restaurant in Pittsburgh? What's your favorite hamburger in Pittsburgh? Something along those lines where they kind of advise you. And then also that advice is something that I ask for my listeners as well. I went in and I showed them like 6 of my potential new podcast rebranding artwork, and they chose the one that they liked. They gave me so much information, it was crazy. And requests, you can ask them for stuff from them that maybe, what is your favorite XYZ? So they don't have to necessarily be about your podcast. They can be just about you and them in a real personal way, which is a really fantastic way to connect with your audience. And then you have to provide them with the tools to share your greatness. There are a lot of people who want to share what you have to offer. And as much as they would want to maybe, even write out a tweet, they don't quite, it's not as organic to a lot of people to do stuff like that. So if you have something specific, if you can say like, hey, I have this image, would you mind sharing this? Or here's a link, can you share these little things that I'm doing? You ask them to do it. I did that for my people. I said, hey, do you mind, I'm doing this presentation, would you guys mind sharing this? Here are some tweets. And because they love me, they did that for me. I didn't ask for them to do it because they had to. I said, if you feel comfortable, go ahead and do it. and you provide them, you give them the tools for them to do it for you. They will. They want to help you, especially if they're your fans. So now after learning about that, this is the third aspect of your foundation, which I find to be perhaps one of the hardest things to do. It was for me. It continues to be hard for me. So this mug here, this is my personal mug. This is the mug that gets me through wintertime. It's the one that I hold in my hands and I feel warm and fuzzy. So this mug has meaning to me. If you guys saw this mug, it probably wouldn't have anything to do with you. So I want you to keep something in mind. Meaning comes from you. You impart the meaning into it. Somebody else might not believe it. Okay? So I came up with this system which is based on the SMART goal setting system. If you guys don't know about the SMART goal setting system, I'm sure you can search for it, but I'm going to kind of break it out and sprinkle a little bit of the yogi juice on it so that you see it. So I based the goal setting system on a sacred cup. On a sacred cup. Sacred cup in Latin is capice. Capice, which is sort of the root word for capiche, you know? Understand? So capice is something you can hold in your hand. It's sacred. It's something you can bear, and it's compact and it's steady. So capice, when you're setting a goal for your podcast, especially for marketing and promotion, this is incredibly important. So C, you have to be very clear about what you want. And by clear, it might be a little bit boring and a little bit too square, such as I would like to gain 100 followers on Twitter in 4 weeks. I would like to up my listener audience, my listening audience, by 5% in 2 weeks. So it has to be that specific, sort of not something like, I make it into, new and noteworthy in iTunes. Like that's not very clear. It has to be very tangible, because the next thing is that it has to be accessible. You need to be able to measure. You need to be able to measure if that happened. So if you say, I want to up, 100 people to follow me on Twitter, you'll be able to assess that. You'll be able to see it. The next thing that it needs to be is that it has to be possible. So the reason about, being new and noteworthy in iTunes, yes, you could be new and noteworthy in iTunes if you're new. But if you had your podcast for a while, you're not going to be new and noteworthy, so that's probably not the best goal to have. So it does need to be possible. It has to be something that when you say it, you actually feel that it's possible to do. There are some of us who can say, I'm going to up 25% of my listeners in 2 weeks, and you know it. You know you can do it. There's some of us who shake at that. So you choose a goal that is possible for you and that feels good inside of you, that you can trust in. The next thing is that it needs to be important for you and what you want to do with your podcast. This is also key, because if you're trying to build a business, or let's say you are trying to monetize your podcast, if you are choosing, let's say, let's pretend it's more about Twitter than it is about building an email list or even setting an email list up. If your goal is to eventually start to monetize your podcast, then building an email list would more than likely be a little bit stronger choice than having 100 more Twitter followers at a specific time. But it depends on the importance and how it measures with you. If you're a big Twitter person, then yeah. But if you're not, then why? It has to be important for you. The next thing is that it has to be seasonal. And I say seasonal as a time kind of stamp. It has to be able to be in a time frame. So it's not like you say, I want, to up 10% of my listener base, period. You give yourself some time. So you say for the winter time, for 4 weeks or whatever. Every season we have a different shift, right? So we start getting ready for fall, we start getting ready for winter. There are certain choices that we make in winter and fall that we do not make in spring and summer. So I like seasonal better because it has a little bit more of an organic nature in it as well. So all of these build the best kind of goal that you can for yourself. Now, one of the reasons that I use the word accessible instead of measurable is because I find measurable to be too stiff and too hard. Let's say you want to have 3 pieces, or let's say you want to have like 10% or, I don't know, 3 or 5 pieces of audio feedback from your listeners, or any feedback from your listeners in an area of like 3 weeks. Let's say that's your goal. And you don't need it, but you get 1 piece of feedback that blows your socks off and just makes you know why you're doing what you're doing. That, to me, is a great thing. You assess it, and you go, wow, that's it, I got my goal. So even though you didn't get 5 pieces of feedback, you got 1 that was amazing. So this gives you a little bit of leeway so you know inside of yourself whether or not things are working. All right, so just to recap, your foundation is education, stabilization of your existing audience, and the capice method, being able to hold things, a goal, into a sacred cup in your hand, whatever that might be for you. So that's why meaning comes from you. So when you set a goal, it's you. It's your goal. Nobody else can tell you what matters for your podcast. All of that foundation is power. That's the power of your podcast. That makes it strong. So let's move over to the development aspect of it. So once you set that power, that foundation, now you can start to extend out. So it's like what we were talking about in terms of the yoga poses. You stabilize the core, you stabilize that foundation so that you can start to expand and get bigger when you do these things, which is the development of your podcast and how you start to expand your audience, which is what everybody wants to do. All right, so the first thing is you have to be a detective. You have to find out where your audience is. And there are really simple things, like observing, finding out where they are. And one of the ways that you can do this is whenever people email you, figure out where they are. I have a lot of people in one of my email lists. What I do is I ask them, hey, tell me where you practice my podcast. Because mine is yoga, so they'll do what I say. And so they will tell me, and they'll say, like, I just practice. Some people send me pictures of where they practice, and it's amazing. I would not know this if I didn't ask, right? So that's part of it, is asking. Ask people where they are. Observe where they are. And by observing, it's like, who are the people who kind of like jive with what you're doing? Who are the people that resonate with your content, even if they're not listening to you, but that you're like, oh, I really dig hanging out with these people. Where else do they go? And listen to what people are saying. What else are they listening to? What magazines are they reading? What are they watching on television? We are all content producers. It's not like you have to be like them, but notice how that resonates with you. Once you do that, and this is another thing too. Let's say you have a great, strong presence on Twitter. Let's say you're just like monster Twitter person, and your audience is not. That's not necessarily going to help you grow your audience. So even though you're tweeting up the wazoo how great your podcast is, or hey, I have a new episode up, if they're not on Twitter, it's not going to work. So find out where they are. Are they on Google+? Are they on Facebook? Do they engage on Facebook? Do they like Facebook? So you have to pick and choose, and you go where they are. As much as I am sad to say, the majority of my people engage with me, with my yoga stuff, on Facebook. I have to put the yoga stuff on Facebook. I put all the technology stuff on Twitter. That's where I get that response. So I have a little bit of a divide, but I know where my people are. That's where they respond to me, so I have to go where they are. So social media, using complementary media to support your podcast. This is something that I started to do organically for my own podcast and have been doing a lot for the Lives In podcast. We're reaching a lot of podcasters, and I've been doing a lot of testing to see what people really like to sort of engage with. So for me, personally, using a lot of images has really worked for my brand, for my yoga brand. I really love Instagram. I have a lot of people that engage with me on Instagram. I've found a way to be able to market myself in a way that's kind of goofy and fun and engage with them because that's where they are. There's a huge yoga community on Instagram. Who knew? Because we're all so obsessed with these darn poses. So everybody keeps putting those up. So there's lots of hashtags to use on Instagram. Pinterest is also a big one, as well as Facebook. So I can repurpose my images with a link to one of my podcast episodes and introduce people to it. What's really interesting is that now video has also come into play. So for the Libsyn podcast, I've been kind of playing around a little bit with creating promos for each episode on YouTube. So I'll do like about a 3-minute video of our long podcast, which is generally around an hour to an hour and a half. And I'll just sum up what we're talking about in the podcast really quickly, and I'll give them calls to action. Email us for feedback, or call this number, or check out our show notes like right away just for that episode. I'm still kind of developing there. I'm not sure how that's working, but at the same time, we get a lot of juice in terms of the YouTube. Vine and Instagram are about the same. So I have done this for my personal podcast as well. I've done little tiny videos really quickly telling people like, hey, I have a new episode up, something like that on Instagram. It's very, very good to do. So in terms of audio, we are the ones obviously that we host your media, Libsyn does. And then we provide the RSS feed and you can do all kinds of things with it. You might think that something like SoundCloud could be a competitor to us, right? Because they are a completely different platform and they're doing some interesting things in terms of podcasting. But what I find with SoundCloud is that you can do the same thing that I've been doing in YouTube for my podcast. You can create sound bites of your podcast and you can have like a little, your YouTube account, short snippets of your work. It doesn't have to be your full podcast. It could be just a little bit. And you can have an image. This is so good. You can use the image to put into your SoundCloud, and then the SoundCloud is now Google searchable. You can see the player in Google. It comes up on Google, and you can also pin it. How cool is that? So you get that one little thing, and you can put your podcast down in all of these different ways. So remember when we were coming out, when I was telling you where is your audience? How do you know? You just have to test it. You got to go and see if you can get somebody who didn't even know what a podcast was to take a step towards you. You meet them where they are. Maybe they're not hanging around where you are. Text. Another big thing is show notes. I know that these are the hardest things. I just had a poll for podcasters. Blog show notes are perhaps the most heinous thing for podcasters to do, especially the big list of stuff and you got to write all this stuff. But I got to tell you, it's really important for people to do it. This is actually one of the latest episodes of Podcast 411, which is like the actor studio for podcasters from Rob Walsh, who is the VP of Podcaster Relations for Libsyn. He just interviewed Mac OS Ken. I'm not sure if you guys, does anybody know Mac OS Ken? He is a day late podcaster. His podcast is about 10 minutes long, and it's all about the Mac. I love it. He's amazing. You would totally dig him. He's really he's so great. The sound, he's an artist when he does his stuff. He scripts everything out. He even scripts, it's weird, it's not necessarily improv, but he scripts even pauses because it delivers something to you. It's so great. He's amazing. But anyway, he scripts everything, and then back in the day, he asked advice from another longtime podcaster, should I make show notes? And the other podcaster said to him, you know what, no, because then people won't listen to your content. And so he didn't. And now he says he's just like, oh, because he could have had, now he's been podcasting since 2005, he could have had an incredible Apple News site up to now. Daily Apple News until now. Isn't that crazy? So it's like you use it, you leverage it. People will still listen. You'll get more. And also, social media groups and communities. You can always go in there and write stuff, like big stuff, ask questions, engage. That'll get you more listeners. So this is all about not thinking an audio podcast or a video podcast is the only thing. It can do so much more. person to person, the way that we're doing right now. So first, I have to ask you, do you guys have a pitch? Does anybody have your podcast pitch where I can say, give me your pitch. What's your podcast and what is it about? In like, a minute or less. This is something we need to know. So if somebody tells you, you gotta really quickly have it come out of your mouth what it is. It's something we also forget because that will get that conversation going. And the stuff, we have the stuff, right? So right now we have these nice little handouts where this is our show artwork. It's a little square. It's our show artwork. On the back of our podcast, we have a little description. And then we have all of the key places where you can subscribe and give us feedback right on the back. Super easy, really cute. So you get to have a little bit of stuff, and I know it doesn't necessarily doesn't happen all the time. But all of these places, the conferences, the meetups, the business connections, the speaking gigs, all of this time is for you exactly to pitch your stuff, to be able to share. Now, in terms of the business connections, for those of you who are more professionals or have a business kind of podcast, I'm going to go back to yoga. I can very easily go into a chiropractic office, a masseuse office, private training, PTs, all of that stuff, and just tell them, hey, I have a yoga podcast, yoga studios, here's the stuff. Give them one of your handouts, give them a CD of what you have. I also like the USB ports, those are really great. And pass them out. Make connections, that's where your audience is. It's all in that same field. You totally get expanded, like the way that I talked about before, keeping an open mind. Let's see. Here we go. All right, so, oops. I'm going to have to go. All right, so the holy grail of podcasting promotion is being a podcast guest. Audio promos for other people, and audio feedback for other podcasts. So all of these people are already podcasting, built-in audience. Do anything. If somebody asks you to be on their podcast, go. And you need to have a place or an action to give them. This is really important. This is something that refines it. Hey guys, if you want to, come and check out my stuff, go to, blog.libsyn.com/ the podcast name that you were on, and then when they come on, they get something that's just for them from that podcast. So if they listen, they'll engage with you. Audio promos for others. People ask me all the time, will you record something for my podcast? Meaning, hey, welcome to whoever they ask, whatever their podcast is. This is Elsie Escobar from The Feed, the official Libsyn podcast, and you are listening to XYZ. Super great. And audio feedback. People love that stuff. You can send it to them and ask them questions, engage with their community, especially the ones that have something to do with you. If they don't have audio feedback, so what? You send it to them. They'll be really excited to get it. Believe me. I've done that so many times, even with people that don't podcast. I send them audio feedback. They love it. It's awesome. So tactics, here we go. My big mistake was not having any. Because I thought I was an artist. I didn't want to do any of this marketing stuff. I don't want to tell people to listen to my podcast. They should totally just do it because I'm so awesome. But you know what? No. So for many years, I did it wrong, if you will. So within your podcast, having your intro is great. This is from
to pantyhose, technology to travel, makeup to marketing, and style to social media. This is Lady Business Radio. And now, live from her home office in Wilmington, Delaware, your hostess, Jessica Kupferman.
So she had that little intro created on Fiverr. She just gave them the script and they created that little intro for her with that music, and it's so cool. She's the coolest person ever. How quick, that was 29 seconds. Really fast little intro, captures the entire thing of her podcast. Your outro, to really have a little bit of a call to action. That way you don't have to say it all the time. They'll do it.
Thank you so much for listening to Lady Business Radio. You want to shout out on air? Leave us a review in iTunes, and Jessica will personally thank you live during the podcast. Visit ladybusinessmedia.com for the iTunes subscription button or for resources and replays. Thanks again for listening, and keep kicking butt out there.
Super sweet, super awesome, doesn't seem salesy. At least not for me. I was like, oh cool, there's all the stuff I can do for her. So the podcast promo. This is really good stuff.
Hi, my name's Zach, and about 2 years ago, my best friend Ray and I started a podcast basically about our friendship. It's called Blogcast. It's two best friends telling the world about their world. So if you like best friends, and you like awesome stories, and you like awesome best friends, then please head over to blog-cast.com or iTunes and check out any one of our wonderful episodes of Blogcast, powered by Libsyn.
Really nice, huh? No biggie. You can quickly make that. That's also a really great exercise for you to be able to encapsulate what you're about in 30 seconds or less. You can put all of that, again, on Instagram or or YouTube or whatever you want. You can put that stuff out there all the time. So your ID3 tags, having an image, the ID3, do you guys know what ID3 tags are? Yeah? So having an image is really great. And also being able to have, as the artist, the album art, your website, being able to tell you exactly what you want them to do here in the comment section, you can have a call to action. You can actually write, email the feed at libsyn.com and have it down in this section here. You can also, in the lyrics section, put your show notes. It's something that I do all the time, and now with the new iPhone apps, when you start to scroll through, people can read the show notes and actually click through, if you have them in HTML, to go where you want them to go, through the show notes, which is super great. Easy to remember, actionable URLs. So this is something that you guys can know right now. If I tell you, go to blog.libsyn.com/share, that'll auto-populate a tweet to share our podcast. So here, libsyn.com/iTunes. Immediately goes into the iTunes and to the iTunes page for our podcast. rickmulready.com/free. This is Rick Mulready from the Inside Social Media podcast, and what he does here is when you go in there, you have an opt-in, and he gives only his podcast listeners a special little gift, which is awesome. LateNightPodcast.com is by Mark Mason, who is a buddy of mine, who's an amazing marketer. And what he does here when you go to the Late Night Podcast is he has everything in there. So you don't have to say, okay, you go to feedback, you can leave me a review, you can subscribe. Like you just go to LateNightFeedbackPodcast.com and it has everything in one place. AyurvedicToolbox.com. We're going to come up to this next really cool thing that I just found out about. Once I'll tell you here on these tactics here. So on your website, an easy way to subscribe to your podcast. Duh. And so, a description of your podcast. How many of you guys have a description of your podcast on your page somewhere? Like where it's a small little thing, right? A way to contact you, because people really need it. I guarantee you, I can't tell you how many times I've waited and looked for people's email addresses when I wanted to talk to them. A press page could be sort of like a conglomerate of all of these things together. So a press page involves your podcast artwork, a headshot of yours of some sort, or a picture that you like of yourself, a really quick snippet of what your about page is, or like about your podcast, and any podcasts that you've been on that you can highlight, and your podcast promo for people to link through. So all of that stuff people can take and share very quickly. An easy way to consume your podcast, but obviously a podcast player somewhere on your website would be nice. You would be surprised. You would be surprised. A podcast archive page, which is something that we got feedback on ourselves because we don't have a place where people can easily see all of the podcasts in one place. It's like they have to keep searching through. If we had just a page where it has all of them listed, super easy to navigate for people to read it. Your show notes and blog notes can have, this is what's on the bottom of our posts. We have help us spread the word, and then a little kind of call to action to tweet about us, if you dug the episode, to leave us a rating, and how to subscribe via all these different places. This is just a piece of snippet that I put on every single one of my show notes, just on the bottom, so people can kind of do it, right? And help them share your stuff. And the last one is lead pages, which I was going to show you about. Does anybody know about lead pages? This is a paid kind of product, but it's really cool. So lead pages gives you the ability to be able to create an opt-in page for anything, basically. And they have one for podcasts. This is my friend Kate Stillman, who's from the Yoga Healer podcast, and she uses this URL called the AyurvedicToolbox.com. She hasn't actually set it up just yet. She just started this. And when she says that in her podcast, hey guys, come to the AyurvedicToolbox.com to get your free cheat sheets for, seasonal eating. And so when people come to this page, they immediately get like a little 1-minute video of her showing how to do what they're going to get, these cute little cheat sheets. Then subscribe to iTunes, review your podcast, and then you click here, comes a pop-out, they give you their newsletter, their email address, and you get the stuff. So she's actually harnessing all of her podcast listeners to take a deeper step towards her, which is great. So yeah, Lead Pages is a paid product. You can, I think it's leadpages.net if you want to kind of find out about them. And I waited. I know you guys love iTunes, and I put that last because I really don't like people focusing on iTunes so much. But in order for iTunes to work for you, your title is one of the most important things you can have. So if you are looking to find your audience, you need to know what people are searching for. Even if it's improv stuff, you need to have improv somewhere in your name. So even if you have a podcast that has no improv name into it at all, and you're looking for improv people, you'll put your name, whatever that podcast is, and then at the end of it, you'll put improv podcast. Just add it to the end. It doesn't have to